The UK courts controversy as it invites China to its upcoming AI summit. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown. One of the dimensions of AI that we track here at the AI Breakdown is, of course, the geopolitics surrounding it. Now, this is not just an issue that matters to policy wonks and people who have a history or social sciences background. This is an issue that could have significant impacts on how the field develops. In the US, tensions with China are already impacting things like where American chip companies can sell their wares or not. In the military sphere, there is a constant and accelerating arms race when it comes to AI applications for future fighting uses. China is also at the center of the debates around AI safety. You will often hear people point to China as the reason that we can't slow down, effectively saying they're not going to agree to slow down, so we can't either. And so one of the big questions has become how much to try to include China in those larger global governance conversations. Well, that is getting a live test right now because the UK government has invited China to participate in their big AI summit later this fall. UK Foreign Minister James Cleverly said in a statement, quote, "We cannot keep the UK public safe from the risks of AI if we exclude one of the leading nations in AI tech." Now, to understand Cleverly's background in this context, last month he became the most senior minister in the UK to visit China over the last 5 years, and broadly speaking is in the camp of arguing for deeper engagement with Beijing. He said that there are too many big issues, ranging from climate change to economic instability to now artificial intelligence, where it just doesn't make sense to isolate the world's second largest economy. And yet at the same time, the UK is currently embroiled in a Chinese spy scandal. As Politico writes, Rishi Sunak has spent most of his brief premiership treading a delicate balance on relations with China. So the last thing the British Prime Minister needed as he enters a careful autumn of diplomacy was a Chinese spy scandal erupting in his midst. Basically, about a week and a half ago, 2 parliamentary researchers, both men, one in their 20s, one in their 30s, were arrested under the Official Secrets Act on suspicion of spying for the Chinese government. What's more, as Politico writes, one of the men is a well-known figure at Westminster who was involved in international affairs and had close links to senior conservatives. One parliamentary aide who knows the man said everyone who had come into contact with him is feeling angry and exposed. Another person involved in Westminster's China policy circle added, "It's hard to trust anyone in the field now. This is a real shock. Everyone wonders what went wrong." So that is the climate into which the UK has decided to proceed inviting China to the AI summit. And since the announcement, they've basically been on the defensive. Politico again wrote a piece about how UK Chancellor Jeremy Hunt had been pushed to defend the decision to invite them to the summit. Hunt said in an interview, "If you're trying to create structures that make AI something that overall is a net benefit to humanity, then you can't just ignore the second biggest economy in the world. That doesn't mean that you make any kind of compromises with your values, but sometimes dialogue can be beneficial." Hunt and the Sunak government's argument is basically that A, they're important, they're big, they're a technology leader, and B, just because we talk to them doesn't mean that we're going to embrace their approach to things like surveillance. Now, as an interesting aside, Jeremy Hunt is actually at the beginning of a trip to visit with a number of tech giants in places like Seattle, San Francisco, and LA. Now, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has also tried to reinforce the message coming from other parts of his government saying, "We recognize that China is an authoritarian country and represents a significant challenge, and it's right only to engage when it's in the interest of the British public, and I think that's what you're seeing us do here." Now, in many ways, this has become a bit of a referendum in the UK on the Sunak premiership's approach to China in general. UK news stations are filmed with current and former politicians, sharing their 2 cents about why China shouldn't be at the AI summit. And perhaps in response to some of that, the latest news is that the government may be trying to split the difference by keeping the Chinese invite intact, but banning Chinese officials from parts of the conversation. The Guardian writes that Chinese officials might be only allowed to attend the first day of the 2-day summit because of concerns over this espionage scandal. Now, we don't have a full agenda for the event, so we don't know exactly what it would mean for them to come only to one day versus the second, but presumably you might expect to see less deep technical conversations on that day that China was invited to, and more general global cooperation type conversations. Now, to be clear, China hasn't even accepted this invite yet, and to the extent that they did, it's not clear who would come. Right now, expected attendees include U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, French President Emmanuel Macron, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and tech leaders, although people like Zuckerberg and Elon aren't confirmed yet. Now, when it comes to wider conversation, at least in the AI safety side, the decision to include China has a lot of backup. Future of Life Institute President Max Tegmark writes, "The UK Bletchley Park Summit is a huge opportunity for AI safety if it doesn't turn into big tech's regulatory capture 2023 or a geopolitical pissing contest by snubbing China. It also needs to cover the full spectrum of AI risk from current harms to human extinction. The Future of Life Institute has actually published a set of recommendations for the summit, which may end up being part of this week's long read. But when it comes to China, some of the recommendations include One involving all major AI powers in the summit, including Brazil, China, the EU, India, Japan, and the US. Two, to the People's Republic of China, they recommend, quote, engage in an open dialogue with the US despite ongoing economic and strategic competition. Global threats from advanced AI, they write, much like climate change, urgently demand cooperation, even if this is not possible on most bilateral issues. And of course, they say the same things directed toward the United States. So we will see how this shakes out. It's not clear yet if the UK government is going to go through with this sort of half and half approach where China is invited to the first day but not the second day. It's also not clear if China is going to accept the invite. But it does certainly reinforce how the existing geopolitical tension between China and the US in particular, but really the West more broadly, impact the world when it comes to these issues of global importance. An opinion piece in the South China Morning Post from August read, "World cannot afford AI cooperation falling prey to US-China geopolitical strife. Geopolitics is a threat to international cooperation on AI legislation, resulting in patchwork strategies, competing goals, and disjointed global standards." So friends, this is something that we will have to keep an eye closely on. But for now, that is going to do it for today's AI Breakdown. Thanks as always for listening or watching. And until next time, peace.